start notes over the transition from the Roman Republic into what is known as the Roman Empire. We talked about on Monday and Tuesday a little bit about the Roman Republic and the different aspects of the government that made Rome such an efficient republic. And now we're going to talk about some of those problems. In the Roman Republic, the vast land and all of the wealth that Rome was able to get started to bring major gaps between the rich and the poor. Small farmers were no longer able to compete with these large farms, large-scale farmers, large landowners called living on these latifundias. And a latifundia is just like a large estate or a large farm, and many of them were run by slaves. So it was very hard for these small farmers to compete with that. So with that growing problem, with the growing problem of this huge economic imbalance between the rich and the poor, you had some reformers coming in. And these two brothers named Gaius Gracchus and Tiberius, these were two brothers who tried to come in and they wanted to reform to make things better in Rome. What they wanted to do was limit the estates that were there in Rome, and they also wanted to distribute land to the poor. And Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus really spoke out against this, and they really were upset about the fact that a lot of the former soldiers in the Roman legion were without land. So that was a really passionate thing for them. However, a lot of the senators were very threatened by their views, and they were very threatened by these ideas, so they were killed. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus were both killed. And this leads to a period in Rome of a civil war. You know, we know what a civil war is. It's whenever two sides, there's a conflict within one's own country. We had a civil war in the United States. So a civil war breaks out in Rome. There are two sides, people who support those views of Gaius Gracchus and Tiberius, and then those who do not. Of this civil war, there is one ruler who's able to come in and bring some order into Rome, and that ruler's name is Julius Caesar. I know you guys have all heard of Julius Caesar. He was a very popular he's a very popular ruler, and when we think of Rome, we oftentimes think of Julius Caesar. But Julius Caesar was a very ambitious, he was very daring, he was a very good, strong leader. He comes to power in what is known as a triumvirate. He, Crassus, and a man named Pompey come together, and they rule kind of in a group of three rulers. Julius Caesar is he is the consul. He serves only 1 year because that's how long the consuls were to serve. And then he appoints himself as governor of Gaul, which is now modern-day France. And he is able to conquer all of Gaul, and that gets him lots of power and lots of support from the other Romans, because he was able to conquer this area, get this area for Rome. So people were very supportive of him, and that's how he was able to kind of win the Roman people over. After he conquers Gaul, at this point, he and Pompey became very fearful of each other's political power, and they become political rivals. So Pompey gets the Senate to order Julius Caesar to come back to Rome, to disband his legion in Gaul and come home. However, Julius Caesar does not do that. Julius Caesar marches his army through Italy, and Pompey flees. He's able to defeat Pompey's armies at Greece, Asia, Spain, and Egypt. So basically, Julius Caesar was able to defeat and take down Pompey. And when he returns to Rome in 44 BC, he names himself, or is named, dictator for life. And Julius Caesar rules as an absolute ruler, meaning he executes total power over the people. But as he's in power, he makes some really big changes. He expands the Senate. He also creates jobs for the poor by these massive building projects, so that gains him lots of popularity. He also he grants Roman citizenships to a lot of the people that were living outside of Rome in the provinces. So he did do lots of reforms that made him popular with the people. However, a lot of nobles and senators were feeling very, very nervous about his political power, and he is actually killed on March 15th, 44 BC, in the Senate building in an assassination attempt by Brutus and Cassius. You probably have heard this if you've ever read the Shakespearean play Julius Caesar. You probably have seen the dramatic effect of Julius Caesar being killed on the Senate floor by Brutus. So lots of references to these. And this date is often called the Ides of March. Okay, so after Julius Caesar dies, the Roman Republic, or what was left of this Roman Republic, falls. The civil war kind of takes over, or a civil war takes over what is left of the Roman Republic. You have another triumvirate comes into power: Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. And this triumvirate kind of ends in political power being abused and jealousy and a bunch of violence. Octavian eventually encourages Lepidus to retire, and then there is conflict between Mark Antony and Octavian. Octavian believes that when Mark Antony goes to Egypt, when he falls in love with Queen Cleopatra, he thinks he is trying to rule Rome from Egypt. Therefore, he goes in to conquer Mark Antony's troops in Egypt. You all know the ending story with Mark Antony and Cleopatra. They both end up committing suicide, leaving Octavian. So that the second triumvirate does not fare out very well. There's lots of political conflict going on there. So after this, Octavian officially names himself Augustus, which means exalted one, and he declares himself the emperor or the imperator of Rome. That just means supreme military commander. So now at this point, Rome is no longer a republic. It is now an empire ruled by one man. Under Augustus and a few other rulers, there was a time of Pax Romana, meaning Roman peace. And this period of Roman peace really helps facilitate trade and spread of ideas and religion because there was no fighting going on. This was a peaceful time in Rome. So now ideas can be spread and religion now takes flight, and we'll talk about Christianity, how the Pax Romana really facilitated the spread of Christianity. As far as a ruler, Octavian, or Augustus, we'll call him Augustus, was a very able ruler. He was actually a very good ruler. He set up some really good systems in Roman government that helped almost manage itself after he dies. He sets up the civil service, which manages the grain supply, also set up a system for tax collection, meaning he hired people and had government officials that did this. So he had government officials that managed the grain supply, government officials that facilitated tax collection. So it was a very, very efficient and manageable government under this civil service. After he dies in 14 AD, the Senate appoints Tiberius, which was his adopted son, to the throne. This is just a map of how far the Roman Empire stretched. As you can see, it went all the way to Great Britain, all the way down into Egypt, all the way to Mesopotamia, and it stretched into Greece, and there's the main hub there in Italy. But you can see this was a humongous, vast area of land, and at the top I have all roads lead to Rome. And the reason why I have that is because we'll talk about the trade that went on during this time of Roman peace and as well in the Roman Empire. Okay, so most of Rome was based on agriculture. 90% of the Romans were farmers. Rome had a very vast trading network, as you see in the empire. All roads lead to Rome. They had roads that were built for military purposes, but they were soon used for trade. So these roads that were once used in order to maintain military across the empire were now going to be used for trade. The empire was split into provinces so that the Roman government could rule more efficiently. But like I said earlier, the main problem in managing this empire was the question of emperor succession. If there was no clear way of managing emperors and controlling that line of succession, that there was going to be lots of problems for the empire. The 5 good emperors, these were the first emperors that had actually adopted an heir to the throne. So starting with Nerva in 96 AD, each emperor after him picks a line or an heir to the throne. So after Augustus, you had Tiberius, Caligula, Nero, then Domitian, and then after that you have the 5 good emperors. And these emperors, what made them good is the fact that they did have an heir to their throne, and after they died, they had someone else coming in to take over. The death of Marcus Aurelius actually sparks the end to the Pax Romana and ends Roman peace. Okay, a little life in the empire. Boys were favored over girls, mainly because the men were expected to carry on the legal legacy of Rome. These would be the citizens. These would be the ones who are getting to vote. These are the ones who get to carry on the family traditions. And this was actually shown, and oftentimes girls were just given feminine forms of their father's name, just to kind of show that these girls were just an extension of men. And with that being said, however, while men are the head of the household, they are the pater familias, or the father of the family, women had almost equal rights. Women could, upper class women really ran the household. They were given authority and respect. They were given way more freedoms than women in Greece would have. They could own property, they could testify in court, but they could not vote. They were officially, as far as the government goes, were expected to stay kind of in the background. But women were they had more rights. Even lower class women, they could have jobs, they could be shopkeepers, they could be in the entertainment field. So women in this Western culture in Rome actually did carry more rights than the other cultures we've talked about. Slaves were definitely a part of Roman life. A lot of times they were captured, or conquered people were captured, kept as slaves. They were treated very cruelly, and they a lot of times were forced to become gladiators, which we'll talk about gladiators in a minute, but those were just the people that were fighting for show in the Colosseum. They were like professional fighters, and they would fight to the death. And we'll talk about how slaves are gladiators and professional fighters, but also Christians, whenever Christianity comes onto the scenes, they were also used as gladiators because they were being persecuted. So that's how they would be persecuted and put to death a lot of times, was in the gladiator ring. They worshiped many gods. They, just like the Greek gods, they were polytheistic, and they believed that their gods did take on human-like forms, but they in return gave their gods Roman names. But government and religion were very much, they were linked together, and these gods were kind of like symbols of the state. And these Romans were expected to worship the gods in the privacy of their homes, as well as in public worship. So a lot like Greek religion, the Romans worship many gods that took on human forms, but they have Roman names as opposed to the Greek names. And their entertainment, like we talked about just a minute ago, the government provided free games, gladiator contests, races and games, mock battles that took place in the Colosseum. And like we said, these gladiators were often slaves, or a lot of times these Christians being persecuted. So this was all for the entertainment of the Roman people. And you guys probably know that. You've seen that. If you've ever watched anything about Roman culture, you see that they did take pride in these games. And this was a way for the Romans to go and have entertainment, because the Roman Empire was enjoying a lot of wealth and a lot of prosperity. But these games were to bring in the rich and the poor for some kind of entertainment. Here's just my citations for the maps and the book, the maps and the pictures that I used in the presentation. So you guys are needing to fill this information in on your graphic organizer that I gave you in class. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, or we will talk about it when I get back.